Hello and welcome back to the County Chat channel. Today we're talking about a subject quite close to my heart, in fact. It is Sussex Cricket. It's been reported in the sort of last week or so that Sussex have entered a framework sort of deal with the ECB to effectively pay back a debt. They've basically been bailed out by the ECB. The money coming in has not sort of followed with the money coming out effectively. So they are in a situation where, they're having to sort of enter sort of a loan deal in which they get paid money and then they pay it back to the ECB. But I guess we're just going to sort of discuss how did we get here, the situation this proves sort of domestic cricket is in the UK, and also a little bit of talking about the Leonard Curtis Cricket Finance report, which was reported last year, but I think it kind of shows a little bit about what is going on in the kind of county game, and maybe explains why a club like a county like Sussex, which to an outside perspective could probably look like it was in a good position, a club that had been in Division 2 for a long time, has made its way into Division 1, had a good season in Division 1, but could be in a situation where the financial situation is so poor they've had to take effectively a very embarrassing but also a very humbling deal from the ECB in a loan package. So I guess we'll sort of get straight into it with the sort of the headline action. Is it straight off the rip? Basically, Sussex will be entering a framework, as I kind of mentioned, but they will be subject to a point sanction. So they're going to be sort of half the amount of a win in the county championship. So they're going to start on -12 in the county championship, and then in the T20 Blast and the One Day Cup, they'll be having a 1 point deduction. So effectively, again, a half of a win in what are 2 points for a win competitions in those white ball formats. Also, sort of £100,000 fine will be in order, but needless to say, that will be payable in the future, because as you won't be going into a sort of loan deal if you had any money to be able to pay an £100,000 fine. So obviously ECB know that, so it's kind of subject to them being able to pay it in essence. To get into it, I guess, is Sussex's financial position, I guess, as Sussex fans, and maybe just to jump in about again, is the Sussex hat on I've got here. Sussex Martlet's a team I play for. I'm from Sussex, grown up in Sussex, grown up a Sussex fan. I think Sussex cricket fans and people I know, obviously from playing cricket and just know, I think people would have been aware that Sussex cricket, it was not in the best financial position, especially about 5 or 6 years ago. I think around COVID, pretty much all senior players that Sussex had at the time had to go. So Ben Brown, Luke Wells, quite a few others, but just those are two sort of headline players who are now playing for Lancashire and Hampshire respectively. They all left, and Sussex for a while were effectively like a few senior players and just lots and lots of young players. A lot of young players actually around my age. I played against and with quite a few of them. So it was a kind of an era of that, but everyone sort of thought, oh, it's getting better, and they signed more overseas players, and players were coming back into the team, and in 2024 they got promoted to Division 1. So again, had Paul Farbrace as a manager or a coach. I mean, Paul Farbrace was a sort of ex-England coach. I mean, you would think, again, speaking of salaries and things of that ilk, you'd think on the higher end, Sussex were also getting plenty of overseas. I mean, one year, I don't know what year it was. I think it would have been 2023, because it'd been the year of the Ashes. I mean, we got Steve Smith for 4 games. I mean, you can't imagine that was a particularly cheap signing. But anyway, it appears, and especially of the sort of report that was published in 2024, that Sussex has been entirely in that last 10-year period, where basically the money had been looked at in this report. Sussex had always been in the sort of danger zone. So Sussex are understood to be one of the 5 counties that were in the ECB's red zone for this list that was put together. So it was like they were placed in the red, amber, green sort of traffic light model. I'm forgetting what traffic lights are there. But anyway, so basically, and Sussex were one of 5 counties put in the red. It was clear from an outside perspective and from an objective perspective that the Sussex were in a very bad situation. Yeah, and then in their most recent published accounts, which were the ones which were being looked at for this report, the club had recorded an operating loss around 100 and I'm just going to get the actual number up so I don't. No, it's more than that. £7,000, but their losses apparently for 2025, though haven't come out yet, are reported to be far, far greater. So basically, Sussex were operating at a huge loss, needless to say. Near enough £300,000 for a county cricket team is massive. And it basically clearly shows that sort of salaries were not in line with revenue, and all of these things were come down to basically clubs or any kind of business being in a situation where you need to be bailed out. And that's the weird thing about county cricket. And again, I'd actually recommend anyone who's very interested maybe in the sort of finances of county cricket at the moment, which I am one, is to read this report, because effectively it shows that more than half of the counties are totally propped up by the ECB. They're kind of done they were sort of ranked in an index, which was suggesting how they were doing sportingly, but also how well they were doing financially. And only 3 were kind of thriving. It was Lancashire, Warwickshire, and Surrey. They're kind of the big 3. They accounted for about 50% of all revenue made in the county game. That's 3 counties of 18, obviously. Clearly, there's systematic issues at play, and Sussex aren't alone in the fact that they can't keep up with counties of that ilk. Sussex, there was clearly some terrible levels of mismanagement. There's been various people to resign, lose their jobs over this, which, again, as you'd expect, it's a huge thing to happen for a county club. And obviously, Sussex are generally seen as a bigger county, or sort of have been for years. Maybe not in the last sort of 10 years, and I guess that's where this reflects that maybe more. But yeah, so I took some quotes from some of these articles, because I thought there was just some headline ones, some interesting ones. So Professor Wilson, who basically co-authored this Leonard Curtis Cricket Finance report that I'm referring to, he's a professor in applied sport finance, so hence Professor Wilson. But anyway, he said, this is clearly a serious moment for Sussex, and frankly a sobering one for the wider domestic game. When a county is reported to have been placed in special measures, it suggests that the governing body believes intervention is needed rather than simple monitoring. That is significant because it implies that it concerns about oversight, spending discipline, and the ability to operate within its agreed sustainability frameworks. Sussex are an important club with deep roots and a proud history, and for them to be discussed in this way indicates the scale of the financial pressures now running through the county system. So I think this is a really, really, in those kind of 3 quotes that were sort of interspersed and put together, I think it's a really, really simple way that Professor Wilson puts it, basically, and just in the sense of the fact that there is any suggestion that a county of the size of Sussex could fall into this is both worrying on the kind of fundamental systematic level of how county cricket is really running, and how it's running as a money-making sort of endeavour, I guess. But it also makes it a really worrisome thing of how Sussex Cricket were actually managing their finances. So I think the bit where it implies concerns about oversight and spending discipline rather than just simple monitoring, I think that's really interesting, and I think it's understandable, again, in this situation, why I'm one of many people who've signed a petition to basically say that all the board members should resign, and that basically to have let this happen shows such a level of ill discipline and lack of care, if you ask me, to leave, again, a very proud cricketing county such as Sussex in a place where they're basically for 3 years accepting this refinancing agreement, and for 1 year, putting themselves majorly on the back foot in a sort of competitive cricket scenario. It's obviously, county cricket is not massively talked about in a wider sense, and it's not something widely reported on. Currently right now, there's a World T20 World Cup, and here I am talking about Sussex going into administration. But I think it is worthwhile talking about, because what it shows is, what it shows is kind of unsustainability within the county game. And again, as is almost the mission statement for the county chat, I think that's something that scares me, worries me in a way, because I think the fact that Sussex could be drawn into this maybe suggests, some counties which are a bit smaller, and to be fair, I say smaller in a sense of I don't mean it in any negative way. I just mean it as, the county ground on a Friday night, on a T20 night, Sussex county ground can look very full. And there are other counties where I just would say that isn't the case for. That's more what I mean. So when I'm talking about smaller, I'm more meaning just the amount of people who are coming to games and the revenue that is caused by that. So it suggests to me that effectively Sussex has been mismanaged terribly over a long period of time, and Sussex fans have had to just take on the chin the leaving of club legends like Ben Brown and Luke Wells, to name those 2 as a kind of real epitome of what we're talking about. and sort of accept, it was a repurposing situation and reworking it. But then again, I guess as cricket fans and as a fan rather than as maybe an analyst, you look at signings like Steve Smith and Cheshwara Pujara, and you realise, oh well, Sussex must be doing pretty well financially to be able to afford these two. I mean, especially Steve Smith, but Pujara came for multiple years. All whilst having a very developing youth system where effectively a lot of players were coming in and going into the first team. So you'd expect, again, financially maybe not on the biggest salaries, but again, so however many years down the line, Sussex are in total financial disrepair effectively, and we're here. So again, I think it's an interesting one. I think the big thing that is a big sort of what's the word? Maybe indiscrepancy is the kind of 100 versus a non-100 counties, and I think a lot of people suggested this would be the case, but I think again this is the first sign of this, is that there was already discrepancies within the counties on how much money they brought in. The 100 has only caused that to be worse, and obviously the more money going towards them. Of course, the ECB have put into a framework of how money's going to come back. And obviously the most clear and obvious, which I realise I haven't mentioned to this point, is that effectively Sussex's main argument could be that they basically knew that the sales of the 100 were coming and knew there would be a sort of a windfall payment effectively coming Sussex's way, so they could act in a slightly unsustainable fashion, knowing that I think basically most non-100 playing counties with the sales of the 100 teams for about 500 million, 520 million I think it is, are getting about 30 to 40 million as a county, which maybe if that's the argument, you have some logic to, but to me, again, I just think there's no value in that. I think it's basically that would just be an excuse rather than some like calculated thinking. So yeah, it leaves county cricket in a very interesting place, and I think obviously this money is going to start coming in from the 100 sales soon, and this was kind of what that report was all in essence about. To just focus on Sussex for a second, because we'll move on to that financial report mentioning the Leonard Curtis one, because I think it's worth having a bit of a closer look at. The club Sussex made a loss in 8 of the last 10 years assessed, with a loss of almost 623,000 in 2023, followed by 594,000 in 2024. That's different to the operating loss figure that we were talking about earlier. That's just a slightly different financial thing. They're not too total. And basically, what all the sort of reports are suggesting that 2025 was far, far worse, effectively, than these two figures that we mentioned here. To show you this Leonard Curtis report that I am referring to. So effectively, hopefully we'll be playing on your screens now. Effectively, they looked into all of these counties and looked into what was going on, and they effectively worked out why and where the money was coming from. So really clear thing to just kick us off here is that what I was referring to earlier. Surrey, Lancashire and Warwickshire are now known as the kind of big three and make up 44% of the total annual revenue of all counties, and that was in 2023. And basically it shows that there's a very, very big gap, a yawning gap as it's referred to here, between sort of Surrey as the top and sort of between the counties that host 100 franchises and the non-hosts. So again, to keep moving down, we have a little quote from Michael Vaughan talking about smaller counties now must spend their windfall from the 100 on basically sustainability. So something I'm just going to get to here is this performance index that they came about putting together. So they did a score basically on two sort of scores in effect, one of them being on the sort of financial side and one of them being on the sporting side. And effectively, the lower grade you get, the better you're performing. Also, whilst talking about that, several counties rely almost entirely on central funding. So several counties below distributions of Surrey accounted for 6% of the income, 10%, and for basically Derbyshire and Leicestershire and Northamptonshire, it was well above 50%. So basically what that's showing is Lancashire, Warwickshire and Surrey, these massive counties, didn't have to get much money from the ECB, whereas Derbyshire, Leicestershire and Northamptonshire, so maybe the three smallest counties by like sort of finances, have to literally get almost all of their money from the ECB. So again, sort of proving that it just is a bit of a situation where things were clearly on an edge, and counties such as Sussex, so again on the lower half here. So we could zoom in a little bit. Yeah, here we go. So Surrey again well ahead, as they have been, and then Hampshire, Nottinghamshire, Warwickshire, Lancashire, Somerset, Yorkshire, probably all in fairly good positions, you'd say. Obviously, Yorkshire's financial position similarly a bit more perilous than you might imagine, especially for a county that hosts the 100. But then, yeah, teams like Essex, Sussex, Northamptonshire, Worcestershire, Kent, and all of these below in situations that were very, very poor. What is illuminating, though, this was all done off the finances based in 2023. Sussex, as you see here, were actually on 9.68, which is sort of bad, not great. But if you see, again, higher is worse. Yorkshire are higher, Essex are higher, Northamptonshire are higher, Worcestershire, Kent, Middlesex, Derbyshire, Leicestershire. So again, without getting lost in a kind of like angry Sussex fan situation, it's hard not to when you realise, in essence, financially, Sussex weren't in an awful situation. They were just kind of in a sort of similar situation to other counties, say. And especially when you get quotes from the Sussex sort of board and the things that have come out from the interim chief executive in Mark West, and he sort of said, with economic pressures around wider economic pressures, and it's like everyone's operating within these wider economic pressures, whatever you want to talk about, without getting into sort of wider geopolitics. To claim that's kind of the reason Sussex were in a seriously bad position is just absolutely, without trying to not swear, they're absolutely mental to me. So effectively, what we're seeing is, because they've sold off the 800 franchises for this 520 million, effectively, this whole report was in essence trying to talk about what should be done. So here we go, the 520 million investment from the sale of equity in the 108 franchises. So that's all going to be invested in the domestic cricket world, and it's effectively trying to work out, what do these counties do with it, especially these smaller counties? So Michael Vaughan's big thing was that I believe the smaller counties must spend their windfall on player pathways and getting their facilities up to scratch. A very fair point. I think, so there's a few other things, there's basically, a lot of what this basically shows us is that there's serious systemic issues with domestic cricket and how it's funded and how it goes about. It doesn't work as well as other models. It doesn't work really, arguably, for anyone, and arguably it's a kind of a situation in which the sort of the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, to use a very old school, classic term, but it does seem that way. And obviously there'll be more money for the non-100 hosting counties in this windfall, but again, it's a sale. This sale has happened. This is a one-off. This is not going to continue. You can't just keep getting 520 million in. I mean, obviously they'll have more money flowing down, but as much as 520 million is a hell of a lot of money, it doesn't mean it's it's not an endless cycle. So yeah, there was plenty of interesting things suggested. I mean, great, obviously, new opportunities for women's cricket, which has been historically massively underfunded in England, and to ensure that the sort of domestic game supports what is becoming a more thriving international scene, and obviously amateur sense. I mean, women's cricket is doing very, very well in the UK, but this obviously, hopefully, will be able to now stands at a unique inflection point. Introducing new domestic structure presents a significant opportunity. So exactly, I think for women's cricket, this is a great moment. I think what I'm talking about is maybe the wider cricket sense, and I'll stop sharing this. We'll go back to my face. Is that basically, to me, it shows that the kind of county cricket system is in an unsustainable financial position. So whether this is male, female, across genders, across sports, it shows that basically the top end counties, and again, it surprised me which were the top end counties. I knew Surrey would be one of them, but the fact that Lancashire and Warwickshire were the other two actually surprised me in a way, because they make up for 50% of revenues, and of course there's profit sharing, and what is the case in a lot of sports leagues around the world. But of course, there's a unique thing to county cricket, and of course it needs to be sort of financially sustainable. But at the end of the day, you don't have to be a genius to know that county cricket isn't financially sustainable. Is that even at the most famous, successful grounds where people come and watch county cricket, there is not many people there. So to me, I think there needs to be sort of a bit more a bit more bravery in a way. Maybe I think it's a case of effectively. I think there needs to be some larger scale changes, and I'm going to do some videos on this. I think this situation and has sort of opened my eyes to a sort of wider issue that I think needs to be addressed in county cricket and in English cricket in a general sense. Of course, as a Sussex fan, it's a very personal thing. So I guess it's also just wanting to get it off my chest, talk to people about it on the internet, and hear what people have to say. Because a lot of counties are in similar situations, and a lot of counties who don't host 100 fixtures have been left feeling a bit out in the cold. And as much as, again, I feel like I don't want to underestimate the how much money 520 million is, but within the realms of creating sports leagues and within the realms of like being a part of sports leagues, that it can quite quickly go very fast. And so, like, for example, talking about this windfall, I think there were some recommendations in various reports, effectively, that, you know, it's very hard with salary inflation, right? So if players' salaries keep going this way, it's hard if the counties aren't making the money to keep up with it, that you can ever not have salary inflation, because that's just the nature of any sort of world of any profession. But cricket and obviously professional sport, there is a nature of it's always going to be quicker, the turnaround with professional sport. There's always going to be, shorter contracts, higher pay, because it's sport, and that's kind of the nature of it. But if basically these reports are finding that if the money isn't coming in, you can't pay players what you want them to be, they want them to be played. And basically there's been a long-term thinking that if we lose our best players, we lose our revenue streams, right? Because people are going to be less likely to come and watch if they don't think there's good players to come play. So therefore they were overspending on, say, a Steve Smith or a Pujara to try and get people to come watch, but the reality is that they didn't. And then you end up in a situation where you don't have the money to be able to spend money on these players, but you're also not getting the money in a kind of revenue stream sense. So to me, I think that suggests there's a fundamental systematic issues at play. I think there needs to be a much wider, much wider kind of plan, in essence, about like how we actually fix this and how we go about as a system effectively trying to fix it. It's a shame. I think it's a real shame, especially I think there has to be the right amount of sort of emphasis put on these people in charge, the board members, the chief executives, all of these people, because at the end of the day, it's been careless, and domestic cricket in England is on a very thin line, and ECB aware of that, and the ECB know that it's so important, because at the end of the day, even if, and selection policies and all of that, even if, England don't select maybe so directly from the county championship, you need just a competitive league to have underneath international cricket, and that's the same for any sport. So there being such obvious signs of the county championship really struggling financially and being totally unsustainably financially without a massive just influx of money from an entire different format, to me shows that there needs to be a bit more of a, how do we fix this, right? And I think that is where I think maybe the ECB is faltering. I think they're thinking of like, paper over the cracks, rather than thinking how do we actually fix the crack, to keep the metaphor going. But rather than actually trying to fix the real systemic issues, just trying to fix like, oh, we don't have any money, here's the money, then we're all fine. And I think hopefully, obviously, the framework they're putting in place changes this. As I say, I've got some interesting content I'm going to be making and coming out in the next sort of month or two, roughly around this kind of subject. And I hope, people are interested in that. But anyway, I think, without sort of lingering on the same point over and over again, I think Sussex is quite an illuminative example of where the county game is at. If you have any comments or interesting, things to say, do make sure to drop one down below. I'll make sure to like read into them and reply to as many as I can, or all of them really. So anyway, thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope if you're a Sussex fan, you feel a bit more illuminated about the situation. Maybe not. Maybe you just feel more depressed, and that would be fair enough too. But anyway, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you all very soon.